So following my inspired conversation with Adebola Williams, who everybody knows in politics and in diplomacy, I saw another side of him that really endeared me to him a little bit more. When we were talking about books that he used to read when he was younger, he talked about reading Hints and reading Mills and Boons. We talked a little bit about the proposal to his beautiful wife, and I just thought, why don't we do something that's love and romantic and better than chocolate cake? So we're going to be making a chocolate cake with a little bit of a surprise to it out of Dominique Ansel's Everyone Can Bake. This book is a must-have, I think, for every baker because it breaks every single thing that you would ever think about baking into smaller, bite-sized pieces, and then variations are added as well. It's also, Dominique Ansel, I feel, is like modern legend at this point. His bakery invented the cronut, which was like many years ago. It was such a viral thing. It was like a pastry that was a combination of a croissant and a donut. I never got to taste it. It's on my list of things to try to eat when next I go to the US. But it is just such a beautiful book with the cookies, and the pictures are just absolutely amazing. This is where we're going to be making chocolate cake from in honor of Adebola Williams and his romantic side. There's a misconception that people have about baking. They think that it's complicated and you have to have all this fancy equipment. But the truth of the matter is, some of the nicest cakes that I have ever made and some of the nicest cakes that people have ever bought, the secret to them has been no mixers and vegetable oil instead of butter. It's amazing, and it works especially well with red velvet cakes and chocolate cakes. So this is a one-pan cake. We're going to mix it all in one bowl. We're going to pour it into a pan, bake it. And even though it's a chocolate cake, I do want to share a fun food fact. Do you know that a bunch of bananas is called a hand and a single banana is called a finger? Who knew? Well, I knew, but I hope that it's something new that you have learned. So to start off, we need to have a mixing bowl, and you can use any one. Just make sure it's big enough. The chocolate cake has a couple of elements. You're going to need, of course, cocoa powder for your chocolate cake. We have vegetable oil, the magic ingredient for moist chocolate cakes. We have some full cream milk. We have some all-purpose flour, some sugar, some baking powder, baking soda, salt, eggs, and our secret decadent finisher is some Irish cream. So I'm going to get started. Secrets to baking: please make sure that you sieve most of your ingredients first. If you live outside of Nigeria, they will tell you it's already been pre-sifted and things like that. I don't even fall for that hype. I always save all the ingredients I'm going to use to bake, just because you never know what's happened in storage, you never know what's happened in the packaging, and you just want to get rid of anything that can be extra. It can be clumps of sugar, it can be something that has hardened, but just try and save all your ingredients. Make sure you measure accurately. Baking is a science. So unlike cooking, where you can riff off how you feel, what you want, what you don't want, if you mess around with many ingredients when you're baking, you will have a different outcome. So usually you will divide your baking ingredients into wet ingredients and dry ingredients. So your dry ingredients will be your flour and your sugar and your cocoa powder. Your wet ingredients are like things like your oil and your eggs and your milk. And usually it will ask you to do the two things separately. Magic of one pot baking, or one mixing in one place, is you're going to add everything in the same bowl, but there is an order to it. I have a whisk here. You can use a spatula, but I do like using a whisk because obviously it introduces air, which can make for a fluffier result. The first thing here, according to Dominique Ansel, is we need to whisk together in the bowl the flour, which is this one, the sugar. Now he does say that this is a decadent base of a cake, so it's going to be slightly sweet, and that's the reason why I'm going to be using some Irish cream instead of adding frosting or anything else. Nice and simple, and also not to deter the people who feel like they don't have an artistic edge in terms of piping. So I've got flour here, I've got the sugar here. I'm going to add the cocoa powder here. Use the best quality of cocoa powder you can get. Usually unsweetened cocoa powder is the way to go. Then baking powder, baking soda, which will be here. Now these are your leavening agents. That's what they're called. We're not gonna do a baking 101 here, but your baking powder and your baking soda, one is a leavening agent, one's a rising agent. And then let's see, the salt. A lot of people wonder why you have salt in baking recipes. Well, salt is really just something that, what's the word I want to use? It balances. So with all of this sweetness, you need the salt so that you can break up all of the sugar and all of the richness. So now I'm just going to do whisk. Make sure that you mix the dry ingredients properly. And you see here, everything now looks like the color of cocoa, like very light cocoa, right? Now I'm going to whisk together. You're supposed to whisk these things separately, but I'm doing it all together. As long as you whisk them one at a time, and as long as you are gentle with it, you should have a great result. So now I have eggs, 2 eggs. I will try and whisk them first, just to make sure that the yolk and the whites are incorporated. I'm going to add that to our bowl. And then the vegetable oil. It's usually vegetable oil that's called for in recipes because you want a flavorless oil. You don't want to use olive oil unless it's a specific thing like an olive oil cake. You don't want to use peanut oil for obvious reasons. So usually when you're seeing recipes that call for oil, it will be a flavorless oil like a vegetable oil or a canola oil. And then the milk. Full cream milk. This one is full cream milk because the fat in the full cream milk is part of the success for this recipe. So if you go ahead and substitute it and use semi-skimmed or skimmed, you have a thinner result. So now I am going to just whisk it all together. So when you're starting out, do it gently. Obviously use a big enough bowl so that you don't have the contents flying all over the place. If you can make a wedu, if you can make swallow properly, you can make this cake because you just need to put a little bit of elbow grease and whisk. Make sure that you're scraping down the sides and whisk until you don't see any lumps. You shouldn't have any lumps if you sieved your ingredients though, but you want it to be nice and smooth. Everything should be integrated well. You can see that it really looks like a very rich, decadent, like hot chocolate. And then when you're doing this, if you're doing one bowl mixes, what I recommend is make sure you always tilt so that you can be sure that the ingredients at the bottom have been mixed properly. All too many times in my baking journey, in the early days, I would get so excited and I wouldn't scrape the bowl properly. And then once you pour the batter into the pan, you will just see flour. You just see unmixed flour and sugar in the bowl. So this is pretty much good. So look, as easy as 1, 2, 3. Like this is real time. We haven't cut. We haven't said anything else. Like literally, this batter has come together in less than 5 minutes. The key again, make sure that you have all your ingredients together, pre-measured, and we're good to go. Now I'm going to pour. Let me just move these aside. I've got the oven on already. Another thing, before you start mixing, turn your oven on because you need to preheat. It needs to be at a certain temperature. If you don't want to put a cold cake into a cold oven, the rising process isn't going to start on time. So now I have a non-stick baking pan and it says patisserie on the side, which obviously means pastry. So it's actually a proper baking pan. And then it's already non-stick on the inside. I just used a brush and brushed some butter on this. I'm not going to add any flour because the pan is pretty heavy duty. It hasn't disappointed me yet, but if you're a bit nervous about doing this, find disposable liners, find those foil liners, and you can just bake in them so that you don't have to worry about turning them over and it will not come out. Gently pour, let me see how luscious that looks, into our pan. Usually you should have your cake batter just to be on the safe side. You don't know what's going to happen. If you baked this cake before, then you can sort of have an idea of the level that you need to fill it in. But I always say a good rule of thumb is 2/3 of the way up, because you have to give room in the pan for it to rise. Okay, now I'm going to take it to the oven, and then it's going to bake. The instructions here say that it should bake for a particular amount of time. It says 1 hour 30 minutes because they want it to go low and slow. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. What we're going to do is I increase the temperature, and this is a single pan rather than a larger pan, right? That also affects your baking time. I'm going to stick it in the oven. We're going to check it again in 20 minutes because ovens vary, temperatures vary. So we'll start checking at the 20-25 minute mark, and we'll know when it's ready when we do a little toothpick test. So the chocolate cake is out of the oven, and I want to make it a little bit extra special, and the best time to do that is when it's still hot, because you want whatever it is that we're adding to be absorbed into the cake. Now you can make holes in it, but you don't necessarily also need to. I've got here my Irish cream, and I've got like a pastry brush. Now that it's still hot, I'm just going to go ahead and just paint the cake with the Irish cream. See, this way you have added another element, you've added a treat to this without necessarily using cream or frosting or any of those things. Make sure that you do it while it's hot, and then you can turn it over once the cake cools in the pan a little bit. Trying to bring a cake out immediately comes out of the oven, out of the pan, it's still soft, so you run the risk of it falling apart. So do whatever it is you need to do. Use a syrup, use a glaze, whatever it is that you do while it's still hot, and then after about 10 or 15 minutes you can turn it over, slice it, and enjoy with some Irish cream. You can have it with ice cream, you could have it on its own, some tea, some coffee, whatever it is. So this is the decadent chocolate cake inspired by my conversation with Adebola Williams. And this is the final product, slices of the decadent chocolate cake inspired by my conversation with Adebola Williams. Look, as serious as you are, there's always a little room for love.